I got him out. Yeah, we got. Can't tell yet. Oh, easy. Okay, welcome everybody. It's going to be an instructional video on making a peacock bass jig. This is what we're going to do. Almost a year ago, I gave my financial commitment to go to Brazil for the first time to fish the Amazon River, something I wanted to do for probably since I first heard about it and saw it in the early 90s when I was in college. So I finally did it. Came back about 2 weeks ago. And in preparation for going to Brazil for the first time, I did a ton of research, tried to absorb as much information as I could about the fishing, about the lures, about the everything. And one of the things that I came across in that research was the jig fishing. Was not something I was aware of before. I always thought that it was a topwater fishery, big plugs and things like that. So I was surprised to learn that these jigs was a big part of fishing in the Amazon. And since I tie something similar for fishing at home, my home waters in New Jersey, for summer flounder, which is what we call a bucktail jig. I already was familiar with most of the methods on how to make these, but there were some tricky parts that I didn't quite understand, so I'm going to get into all that shortly. The first thing I want to talk about is the terminology. In Brazil and the Amazon River, they refer to this usually as a jig. Whereas for those who may be listening who fish closer to where I do in the Northeast, we just refer to this as a bucktail, sometimes a bucktail jig. But the ones that they fish in South America, they refer to as a jig. Some people call it a hair jig, but this is the general idea. So throughout this video, when I refer to bucktails, I'm probably talking about this, because this to me is a bucktail. Everybody else calls it a jig, but it's just my natural instinct to call it a bucktail. Some people just refer to this as bucktail, because this is bucktail. But I may refer to the whole thing as the bucktail. But I could also be referring to this, which is the bucktail, or this, which is a bucktail. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, I want to go over a couple of the parts and get into tying this jig up. The basic idea with this jig is we're trying to create a profile that is about, I would say, 6 to 7 inches long. And this is a special type of jig because it's got this extended tail here that you can see. Okay, I'm going to show you how we make that. That was one of the things about this jig that was kind of confusing for me to learn when I first saw it. I understood what it was, but didn't quite understand how to get this tail attached. Again, the profile is about 7 inches long, and the reason that we have this extended tail here is because a typical piece of bucktail is only going to get us, the first 4 to 5 inches at most, and we want that material to extend out to that 7-inch profile, 6 to 7 inches. So the only way to do that is by making this extended tail, which is a totally separate part of making this jig. One of the other cool features of this particular jig that I tie on all these is this rattle. You can hear that. There's actually a rattle in here, inside the bucktail. It's part of the jig. I'm going to show you how to attach that as well. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is create the tail. The tail's first, and also the trickiest part of the whole thing to me. There's no other, as far as I can tell, there's no other videos that exist like this on YouTube
that give a full instruction on this. There is one other video I found which is in Spanish. It was a good place for me to get the basics, but and even with some of the functions that YouTube has for translating, I was able to get the basic gist of it. But I got to give a special shout out to my new friend, my pen pal. He goes by the nickname Black. And this is a picture of me and Black together at the Barcelos airport, and this is his little shop where he sells the jigs. And I think it has to do with the Rio Negro, the Black River. But I'm gonna post a picture of his Instagram site. Really kind of cool. I reached out to him because he was making these jigs. He does make these jigs and he sells them in Brazil, near where I went fishing. I reached out to him, didn't know who he was, he didn't know who I was. Had some questions about making this tail. He was really kind enough to answer me with a video. He spoke perfect English and really helped me in my preparation for making these jigs. So we'll talk about all those things and let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about, of course, is the jig head and the hook. Okay, this is important. People warned me about the power of these peacock bass in Brazil. I didn't listen. I didn't believe it. I didn't think that they had as much power as they do. I mean, I fish with similar bucktails. I fish with these things. We catch big striped bass, we catch bluefish, catch big flounder. Certainly in the same size as far as length goes as these peacock bass. So when people told me they could straighten out a hook, I didn't believe it. Well, unfortunately, I learned the hard way. My final day of fishing in the Amazon, was fishing this particular jig, red and white. And let me just show you the hook. Let me just show you what this fish did. It's almost an L shape. I don't know if you can see that too well, but I mean, this was a big fish. I never saw the fish. I only felt it. We threw this jig and it was over in about 30 seconds or so. It almost straightened that hook. I mean, and this is a pretty strong hook. I think this is 3X, but I can't overestimate the strength and power of these big peacock bass. I didn't believe it. You could see here for living proof. I'm a believer now. I would not make these in anything less than a 4X, if you can find stronger, 4X hook. This, I believe, is a size 5.0. You can do 5.0, 6.0, 7.0. I'm going to put a picture of, there's a company, I have nothing to do with them other than knowing that they provide some of these parts. It's called lurepartsonline.com. They sell these peacock bass jigs. They sell the Rattle, and they sell a bunch of other parts that you may need. But one thing I forgot to mention as I was recording this video live is the size of these jigs. I tied some of these jigs in 3/8 ounce and 1/2 ounce. I found the 3/8 ounce to be too light for casting. I would definitely recommend a 1/2 ounce for maximum distance. I don't think you want to go up to 5/8 ounce. I think they're too heavy and will get stuck on the bottom, so I think 1/2 ounce is the right number. That's where I got this jig head from. This jig head was previously used. It was destroyed by some piranhas. I'll show you some actual jigs that were destroyed by piranhas. So I cut the rest of the material off, and I'm going to use this to tie. But one thing I want to say is that these hooks, these jig heads, often have some kind of material here as a bait keeper for soft plastics. We always tip ours typically with gulp. We'll take something like this and we'll put some gulp on the bottom of it, or a soft plastic, a paddle tail, something like that. So a lot of these jig heads have the bait holder. All you need to do, take a Swiss Army knife, any kind of file that you have, metal file, and just file it flat so you can tie the material on. Okay, some of them have a lot bigger of a bait keeper than others. Anyway, let's get into tying this jig. We're going to do the tail first. So I'm going to remove my jig head from the vise. Now, the tail is constructed from a piece of heavy monofilament. This is 80-pound monofilament. You can use, they recommend anywhere from 80 to 100. I think probably if you can get the 100, it may be better, just based on some of the things that I experienced with some of the line twisting. I'll show you if I can find it. Okay. and we'll talk about this too in a second. This is one of the jigs that I fish with, but you can see, I'm gonna hope you can see, right there, if you can see that. See how that monofilament starts to foul around. Now this also has to do with how I placed it on the hook. It's got to be straight, as I've learned. This is one of the earlier ones that I made, and it did wrap around. And a lot of times you'll retrieve it and it'll come back, twist it around the hook, and you have to untwist it every single time. So we've got to be careful of that. As we go through, I'll show you that. But okay, step one, we have to make almost like a head on this, almost like the head of a small nail. We're going to melt it with a lighter. Okay. I'm going to put some flame on this. Okay, I'm just going to melt the line a little bit. I'm going to tap it with our finger until we get like a flat head on there. Okay. It creates a little end, a little head, okay? The point of that is that when we tie this tail on, the material won't be able to just slip right off this piece of monofilament, okay? So, something a little different here. Some people I've seen some of the videos I've seen, some people do this by hand. Found that kind of difficult to do. I'm actually going to turn my vise completely around. Okay. Okay. It just made sense for me to do it this way. I couldn't tell you why, but as I was trying to learn this, tying this seemed to be easiest for me. I'm going to place that line in the jig, and I'm going to tighten it down, okay? Now, my bobbin is already spooled up with some thread. I'm using very thin thread here. This is a 6/0 red uni, okay? The color that I'm going to tie today, is just what I have, is red and white. Red and white is the most popular color, seems to be the most popular color. Also red and yellow, and there's various other colors which I did tie up, but mostly what I fished was red and white, red and yellow. I did okay on some chartreuse and red. It's kind of up to you, but the popular colors down there are definitely red and white, red and yellow. So the bobbin is strung up, and we're going to wrap our thread. Let me get my vise out of the way a little bit here. This is a lot of dexterity and holding things in place with your hand until you get them all ready. It's not easy to do because there's no support here. There's nothing you can hang the bobbin on. This is all very loose. So one of the reasons that I like to have it in the vise and not do it in hand, or not do it by hand, is that I can almost rest the bobbin on the table here itself, which I'll try to show you if I can. Like that, all right? So I'm going to begin. I'm going to start, like I said, this is not easy to do. It takes a couple to get the hang of it, but I'm going to start wrapping the thread until I've got enough. Then I'll just let it sit, okay? Just like that. A little bit of tension. Cut off this tag end. When making this fly, I don't think you can put on too much head cement or super glue. You're going to need it throughout here. The ones that I made, they were pretty strong. They stood up to a lot of fish. They stood up to some big fish. They didn't fall apart. Like I mentioned in the beginning, the only time they fall apart is when the piranhas get to them. You can see this is what happens to the extended tail when you get a couple piranhas. They just bite it clean off. Here's one that has the tail bitten clean off. Plus some of the bucktail. You can see how they chop on that. Here's one that just got destroyed by piranhas. You can see how clean some of these cuts are. It's almost like you took a knife to it, but I didn't. All right. So I'm supporting this. I'm left-handed, so I'm wrapping with my left hand, kind of supporting everything with my right. And I'm just going to let that sit. Again, this tail is to make it about a 6 to 7 inch profile. Just want to show you one thing real quickly. I did tie a couple of these with just some saddle hackle type of material, and you get about the same size. This is almost like, looks like what a deceiver would look like, a deceiver fly. So about the same size. You could tie it in those if you want. It's certainly quicker than making this extended tail. you still come up a little bit short. See the difference in size here. This is the same hook, and you can see the one with the extended tail is a bit longer. But this would work. I don't think I fished this particular one in Brazil. Just didn't get to it, but I think it would work. All right, I'm gonna do the tail in a solid color. Again, this one is gonna be white and red with, the tail's gonna be all red. So what I'm gonna do is select some pieces. Doesn't need to be super thick. We're gonna tie it in. I'm gonna tie some bucktail in, then tie some flash in, and then tie some more bucktail in, okay? So I'm gonna select some bucktail. Okay. So I'm gonna hold this in place as best I can with my right hand, make a couple loose wraps, okay? Once it gets tied on there, then I can tighten it up. And I'm tying tight here. I'm pulling, putting a lot of tension on here, okay? I have some extra material which I'm gonna cut off. I'm going to pick some red crystal flash. I like to pick a color flash that goes with the color that I'm tying in. So I'm using red, to use red crystal flash. I'll say this about the flash on these flies. I don't think you can, okay, maybe some people will interpret this the wrong way, but I don't think you can put too much flash. With the saltwater flies that I tie, tend to go a little bit lighter. You don't want to make them too unrealistic looking, but these, I found all the flies that were made by the local guys had a lot of flash, more than I had even, and I thought I was putting a lot in. So anyway, I'm gonna cut off some crystal flash, a generous amount, and this is just for the tail. Okay, it's a crystal flash in a red color. I'm gonna put that around the thread. I'm gonna look for a part of on the fly. I don't know if you can see this, but right here, there's that head that I made on the monofilament showing through. So I'm gonna try to attach that right where that gap is if there's no material. Okay, we're gonna tie more bucktail over this. Okay. Yeah, I'm using both hands here. You got to use both hands. That's why I like to have it in the vise. I think would be difficult to do this without the back end of this monofilament being held by something. Again, I'm stretching the monofilament. I'm stretching the bobbin down to the ground to hold it, and I'm just going to let it hang loose for a second. Good. Okay. This flash is about the same length of the tail. If it's a little longer, that's okay. And I'm going to cut another small piece of the tail color, this red. Doesn't have to be super thick. What I'm trying to do really is just kind of cover up the crystal flash that I just tied in. Okay. All right. Same thing here. Place that right here. Oops. Some loose wraps first to kind of get it in place. And then it is a little bit tough because you're doing the work of the vise. You're trying to keep this thing steady while you're making wraps, so it's not easy. All right. I'm wrapping as close to my fingers as I can. Okay, and that's pretty much it. That's our tail. Okay, pretty straight. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to release this from the vise. Okay, it's loose now. I'm just going to do a couple ties with my. There's really no good way to whip finish this, so just do a couple knots. Let's get some slack here. I'm going to feed that monofilament through. Just going to let the weight of the bobbin fall down and create that knot. Cinch it up there. Do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Monofilament through. Okay. And tie that down. Okay. Good. I can cut this off. This is my tail. I'm going to put it back in the vise for a minute just because I'm going to glue it now, just to tie all this stuff in. Okay. a little bit, doesn't need to be totally clean looking. I mean, it's okay. Like I said, it's going to get glued. I'm going to put some super glue on here, some Gorilla Glue. Now, one thing I'm going to use, which I don't typically use at home, I am making this video today from we're in a ski resort in Vermont. I don't ski. My family's out skiing. That's why I'm here doing this. Let's try to, oops. Okay. This is Zip Kicker. I wouldn't use this in a confined space, but it helps the glue set very quickly. So I'm going to take this out of the vise. I'm going to take it over behind me and spray it. Okay, don't want that stuff. I tie my flies typically at home in a much more confined place. I can smell it already. Don't usually like to use this stuff, but it does make the glue set very quickly. So I'm going to put this aside and let it really dry for a few minutes, and then we'll set the jig head up in the meantime. Whew. But you can see this is already, I just sprayed it. The glue's already dry. It's an instant bond. Okay, the tail is drying. I'm going to reverse the direction of my vise. I'm going to loosen it up and get it back in the normal orientation that I use it. Okay, vise is back in place. I'm going to take my jig head back. Okay, it's going to go in the vise. Okay. All right. Hopefully you can see that. All right. And they're nice and tight. Okay. First thing we're going to do is tie in our tail. So I'm going to tie in my thread at the head. And work all the way back. Each jig head is different. So you gotta you just have to adapt to which kind of jig head you have in terms of where you tie the tail in, where you tie the rattle in. So on this one in particular, now here's the tail that I made. It's dry. This piece right here of monofilament is way longer than I need. Again, I'm trying to come up with a profile that's about 7 inches long. So I'm gonna use a previous one to kind of gauge where I need that tail to be. Okay, this is just an eyeball type of thing. So I know right about there is where I'm going to tie in the tail. So I got a lot of extra monofilament. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to cut off this extra. Now that step we did in the beginning, where we melted a head onto the tail, so you can't pull it off this way. We're going to do the same thing again on this side so that it won't come off the hook. Okay. So there's our head. Hopefully you can see that. It's almost like the head of a nail. And again, that'll keep it from coming off. So I'm going to tie this onto the back of the hook. Okay. I'm going to go past this little bait keeper and I'm going to tie this in. Now, I'm going to tie this right under the shank of the hook. Okay. As straight as I can, because like I showed you before in the beginning, you don't want this. You don't want that mono to be off center like this one is. Okay, you don't want to be constantly trying to pull it back while you're fishing and trying to correct a mistake you made while you were tying the fly or tying the jig. So I'm going to look from the top. This looks like a good orientation. I'm going to tie in all the way to where the hook starts to bend and then tie back and keep going. Now, okay, that's good. It's leaning a little bit towards the left side, but that's okay. That's okay. You'll see that also, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but the Gorilla Glue is kind of drying in a whitish kind of ugly appearance. If you want to cover it up with some head cement, it's fine. But I don't think it really matters with these fish. Okay, I'm gonna tie in a little. I'm gonna put in a little bit of head cement here, just to secure this tail to the jig head. Okay. Like I said, there's no harm in doing this at multiple stops during this tie. We're gonna definitely do it on the next step with the rattle, because the rattle's big, and the rattle needs a lot of glue. Okay, good. All right, I'll let that dry while we get to the rattle. The rattle, I got 3 different colors you can pick depending on what color jig you're tying. I've got red, I've got black, and I've got clear. Okay. Also, these came from lurepartsonline.com. I think Cabela's has, Bass Pro has them. They're a little bit different than these, but these are very lightweight. I don't know if you could put them on a fly. You maybe could. They don't weigh a whole lot. For this one, since the fly is red and white, we're gonna make this. We're gonna put a red rattle on here. Okay. So I'm going to bring the thread back up. It's going to go, the rattle's going to go on the shank somewhere. You don't want it to interfere with the bucktail that you're going to tie in closer to the head. So, as I mentioned before, I kind of flattened out an area on this hook, on this bait keeper. And I'm going to select an area here. Like I said, and you need space up front to tie in your bucktail. If this thing is too far up, it's going to interfere. If it's too far back, it may interfere as well. However, these rattles have a little notch in them, so you can tie it in. And it looks like in this case, this notch will fit kind of right over the bait keeper. And I think that'd be a good place to put this, because it's going to kind of sit right on top of the monofilament. It's not going to interfere with the bucktail. So I'm going to wind my thread and capture this right on top of this little bait keeper bump that I have here. I'm going to tie in pretty tight, okay? And I'm going to look at it again from the top, make sure it's centered, move it over a little bit. And then I'm going to continue to tie rearward over the body of this rattle. Okay, I'm just going to tie it down. It's sitting, the tail, the monofilament is sandwiched in between the hook shank and this rattle. I'm just going to tie it in back and forth, a lot of wraps. Looking at it as I go, making sure it's straight. I don't want, want everything aligned as best as can be. Because once you get in here and put the super glue on, it's not coming off. Okay. The thread it's not going to be neat. It's going to look a little messy, but that's okay. We want a lot of it. We're going to put super glue on here, and we want material to hold that glue in place. Okay. Because we've got a small gap in between the hook shank and the rattle where the monofilament is. So there's a lot of places that we're going to put glue on this. Okay. All right, that's enough wraps. Get the thread out of the way. I'm going to go back to my Gorilla Glue and brush this pretty generously. All right, that zip kicker is some stinky stuff. I just opened the window, air this place out a little bit. Okay, so here's what we have. Our tail is on. Our rattle is on. We're 2/3 of the way done here. What we have left basically is tying in our bucktail and our flash, and that's pretty much it. Of course, when we're doing this red and white, this is how it's going to ride through the water. Okay, hook point is up. So our darker color is going to be what's tied on what we look at as the bottom, but this is the dorsal side, and the white, usually the lighter color, is the belly side. I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to tie in my lighter color first on top, white bucktail. Where is my white bucktail? I'm going to go for the longest pieces I can. Sometimes that can be tricky. You gotta, when you're looking for bucktail, I always like to select the pieces that have the pieces of bucktail that have the longest fibers. Some of them they're just not long enough. Okay. I'm going to cut off a decent sized piece. Strip off some of the excess here. This is about what I want. I want the bucktails for the most part to end right about where the knot is for the tail. Okay, so I'm going to tie this in. Bring my thread up a little bit. Okay, I'm tying it in loosely, and then I'm going to wrap tight. Okay, just like that. Okay, so where that ends is where the tail begins. Okay, move it around a little bit. Now, these are going to be fairly heavy in bucktail because we gotta try to cover this rattle. Okay, so I talked about the flash. I use at this point the product that I really like is called Polar Flash. I saw this Polar Flash in a video that Gunnar Brammer did for a fly that he used in the Amazon, and he suggested this Polar Flash. It's for a different kind of fly, but I bought some, and I believe I got it from Lure Parts online. And no, I don't work for them, but I think that's where it came from. I got two different colors. I got like a yellow pearl, and this one is, I don't know, this is like an orange color. So what I tended to do was on the white bucktail tied in with this lighter color, on the darker colors, the yellows, the reds, the oranges, tied in this darker one. So again, be generous with the flash. I'm going to take a good amount. Okay, and this is generous. This is a lot of flash. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this around the shank of the hook and tie it in. I want this to kind of lay on both sides. Okay, just like that. That's a nice amount. Okay, perfect. Looks good. All right. Now I'm going to go to my darker color, my red color. Pretty much the same idea. Get some long pieces as long as I can. Okay. And tie those on what appears to be the bottom, but what is actually the top. Loose wrap, get them tied in, and then I'm going to start to tighten as I go. And I'm putting a lot of tension on right now. I'm tying this down pretty tight. Okay. Okay, good. All right, now I'm going to tie in some of that darker color Polar Flash, the orange stuff. Okay. Same idea. I'll put it around the hook shank. Try to even it up a bit, and then tie it in. Okay. All right, you can see how this is taking shape. The only additions I'm going to make at this point is just some additional bucktail on the sides. Okay, I want to cover the rattle a little bit. You can see on this side it's showing a little bit. So I'm probably going to go a little bit heavier on my white at this point. Just tying a little bit of white on the side that's closest to me where I can see that rattle. Not that it matters. It's just for me. I don't want to expose. It's more of a aesthetic thing. So take off a little. I'm going to whip finish, do a couple turns with by hand. pretty bulky, so just do it slowly. Okay, that's it. Now, of course, at this stage, we're going to put a final shot of super glue, and then I'm going to skip that step just for the video. I'm just going to cover this up with head cement, make it look nice and shiny. Oops. But I would recommend super glue, and then you can cover the super glue bond with the head cement just to make it look a little nicer. I don't think the fish care, again. As far as fishing these goes, you know, when we were in the Amazon, the water was very high. It was unexpected. We went there intentionally the week that we went for low water, but they had a lot of rain a few weeks leading up to our visit. The water was high, so we did use the jigs a lot. And you know, it's not like these are not fished like we fish jigs where I fish at home, where you bounce them on the bottom. These are casted. You're making a 50, 60, 70 foot cast, and they're retrieved pretty quickly and just kind of bounce mid-water column as you retrieve. It was very cool for me to catch my first peacock bass on a jig that I made. Really a cool accomplishment. The first one that I caught was not even with one of these colors. It was a chartreuse body and a red tail. So the rest of them, though, I think we stuck to red and white and red and yellow. But while this head cement is drying, this is the finished jig. You can hear that rattle in there. Not strong, but it's enough. A lot of these jigs are not made with a rattle. I figure it doesn't take a whole lot of time to tie it in, and these fish definitely seem to respond to noise and commotion. So let's make a rattle. I showed you what happens when you don't use a strong enough hook. This one, I wish I would have had this type of hook on when I hooked that big fish on my last day. I probably, well, I don't know if I would have landed it, but I would have had certainly a much better shot. But yeah, that's the jig. Extended tail with the monofilament, the body with the rattle and the bucktail, and lots of polar flash or whatever flash you like. And this is a great thing to have. We didn't lose too many of these. I think maybe we lost a couple in some submerged logs, and of course then, you know, the ones that get destroyed by the piranhas. But so hope you found this video helpful. If you're like me and you were trying to figure this out, at least the tail part was the big mystery for me. So hope you liked the video. If you do, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.